In the mornings, my voice gets a bit.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Data Management and Analytics playlist. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm very excited to have our fourth guest of this series. This is Elham Arabi. And Elham is a lead instructional designer and learning consultant at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Elham has more than 10 years experience in design and development of online and blended courses in corporate and educational settings. I met Elham at DevLearn a couple weeks ago in a very crowded hallway. So I don't know about you, Elham, but I could barely hear you talk. We were sort of like yelling over the noise of everybody.
Yes.
Yeah. It was a good conversation, though. I was glad that I got to meet you before we had your guest appearance here.
Likewise.
Yeah. And what I really like about this is that you're talking about application today, which, we've discussed. We've had, Megan Torrance on, Sam Rogers. We had AD Dietrich on. But this one, I think it's going to be a little different. I think some of those were a little more theoretical, and this is a lot more practical. So I love that we're going to be approaching the subject that way. And then looks like, hey, Mohammed, good morning. And we have a few people that are on live this morning as well. Let's see, we've got Mary, Dominic, Shakira, Katie. Thank you guys so much for coming in this morning. I want to start out talking about your backstory, Elham. Could you tell us a little bit about your background as an educator? I don't know if you're an instructional designer, and just even like why you got into learning analytics.
Yeah, sure. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I hope that you've had a good start of the day. But I don't know which part of the world you're all here in the US. Well, I started off actually by teaching. And about 7 years of teaching I had. During that period, because you are trained to use a specific methodology and approaches. And when I got to class, I learned that a lot of the students are not really the same. So that got me to think that the methodology that we are using, which of course is somehow structured to somehow one size fit all, that's how it is, I realized that doesn't work. So from then on, without even having studied instructional design yet, I started changing the methodology and aligning them with the different personalities that I had in class, depending on the struggles that they were facing, if they were going fast, if they were going slow. And I realized that basically personalized learning is something essential in order to basically achieve the outcomes that we want from the learners. So that's how got me interested in instructional technology, and I did my master's in that. And then from that one, I thought I could do more because, when I used to teach at the college, and then so usually you're supposed to follow a specific syllabi, and then you wouldn't have that much of a leeway because more or less you have to follow whatever everybody else is following. Mm-hmm. So I thought by instructional design, I might be able to somehow expand this and then help more learners. Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, it's not the case even in corporate or educational settings, because that's what I'm going to be talking about today as well, is that companies also have their own project scopes. Sometimes it's time, and sometimes it's a number of the project. So I just was thinking that how can I make best use of that, my skill set, and then basically work in such a way that more learners can benefit from that.
Okay, wow.
So I try to, from instructional design, then to learning and development. That's how here I am and doing
Great.
my PhD.
And you had a session at DevLearn, right?
Sorry,
you had a session at DevLearn.
Yes.
What was it? What was the title of it?
Well, learning analytics, designing training design enhancement through training evaluation. That's basically what my study is.
Right.
Well, yeah.
And I want to ask you, so one of the things, I think one of the challenges that a lot of folks have when they are considering doing analytics in L&D is like, maybe they're not specifically like numbers oriented, right? I know a lot of instructional designers that are design oriented, right? Or maybe media focused, where they like to, I would consider them a lot more creative. Were you more on the number side, like as far as your personality is concerned? Is that something that attracted you anyway, or it's just it was just your passion to being able to personalize learning is why you got into the analytics side?
It was my passion, actually.
Yeah.
Because that's how I started. Initially, I'm going to be talking about it. I didn't see any value in that, honestly. So
Yeah.
I thought following and tracking these numbers is not telling us anything. Doesn't it specifically translate to learning design? Because how am I going to make sure that the learners are really learning by just viewing certain pages or spending some time on a page? So that wouldn't tell me much.
Right.
But then when I got involved in this project, that completely changed my viewpoint about that.
Yeah. And see, Chikira says, how do you extract the meaning from the numbers? And that's always been her problem. And I think
I'm going to be talking about that exactly.
That's exactly, kind of
what this is application. And I'm very glad that coincidentally, I wasn't able to schedule when Luis, you sent me the schedule. I just couldn't make it earlier.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that coincidentally, I just happened to be the last speaker. The other ones have already covered the theoretical aspect of it. So right. I'm going to be talking about, basically, I thought this was my own question. So I thought that others would have the same question too. How do we really do that?
Okay, yeah, and so I want to also add here real quick, there are a couple polls that if you guys, if the audience, the live audience is, if you're in here, go ahead and go to the bottom of the screen, bottom of your browser, and you'll see that there's a polls area that you can click on. You'll see a couple polls. People have already clicked in. It looks like the majority so far. We're looking at instructional designers, a couple others. And 4 people do conduct gap analysis, so keep on filling those out if you can. Also, we have a Q&A section. If you want to ask a question, go ahead and drop those in there. Looks like we already have one from Mohammed about what are the best ways to collect learners' data and compare it to the performance. I think that Elham is going to be able to answer a lot of those questions. And just real quick, before I sort of drop off and let you take over on the presentation, what do you want people to take away from this discussion?
Well, I'm hoping that, I'm not sure, now that I'm seeing that there are more instructional designers, I'm hoping that the takeaway would be for them to contemplate on their current practices. And if they were against basically using analytics, they would consider that in the best possible way that is conducive to them. So, and then also, from then on, I hope that we can just carry on the conversation of how best we can serve the learners, because the current practices are not really, in a large scale, it's not really how it's supposed to be.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and minimize my window and I'll let you take it away.
And I'm going to share the screen too, okay?
Okay.
Hi, everyone. So glad to have you here. So I'm going to be sharing my screen and then my PowerPoint. Hang on a second. I can't seem to see it here, Luis. I have my PowerPoint on.
Okay, this is what you can do. Just if you mouse over your window.
Application window.
There you go. And you'll see, yeah, there's a little computer arrow. There you go.
Am I there? Okay.
You're there.
Wonderful. Okay.
And I can see it perfectly. It looks great.
Okay, wonderful. So I got to go up. Seems like it has started off from the previous one. So okay. All right, so I'm going to be talking about using learning analytics for learning design and how basically it changed my own practice, more or less. In this session, I'll be talking about very briefly, because other speakers have already spoken in detail about learning analytics, but in detail about the project that I was involved in, and then the lessons that I learned, as well as the training design evaluation. That's the study that I'm involved in as well. So in the poll, I just wanted to get to know you better. So I always like to see who my audience are, and I can see that, oh, well, gladly, we do have some instructional designers. And then I want to see that, okay, well, we do have a few number of people, but I don't see any data analyst. Okay. So, well, simply put, this is a definition that I think would be easier for everyone, and that's what I came up with. There's tons of basically definitions about learning analytics. It's basically the collection of data, analyzing it and reporting it. And these data are merely about the learners and the behavioral events that basically we could track in order to optimize their learning experience. So that's our optimal goal in order to enhance their performance and their learning experience. So that's why we are collecting those data. So before I start, I want to know what you think of learning analytics. You can just take it to chat and then tell me if in your viewpoint, you think that that would be useful for L&D or it's not really useful. We don't really need to consider them. You can tell us here in the chat and we can just carry on the discussion over there. I like to have an interactive session, by the way, so I'm not the only one speaking all along. Okay. Okay. Well, I haven't heard from you yet, so I'll just carry on. You can just continue to join and then share your thoughts as we move along. Yes, that's right, correct. Muhammad is saying that it's important to identify the gaps. I completely agree with you. And that's basically what my presentation is about as well. Okay. So this is how I thought about it before. When, as basically learning designers, one of our roles is to do research in learning technology and then meet vendors and make the best choice of those tools that would best fit our organizations. And a few years ago, when I was involved in such meetings, and as usual, you were going to have 3 vendors, I realized that what they were all pitching about as their selling point was learning analytics. But every time, whenever I asked them, how would that translate to learning design? How will that be important to me if I know how many page views, for instance, they have? How is that going to help me know whether learners are really learning or engaged or not? Well, the fact is that I was never given a compelling answer. So that's why I didn't see much of value in that at that time. But what I think now is that, first of all, it is data-driven. So our design decisions would be evidence-based, and because they rely on data. And besides that, through those data, we can actually validate our learning design based on those evidences. Most importantly is actually having meaningful discussions with your SMEs. So I'm pretty sure many of you have had this experience that you try to convince your subject matter experts and then they just resist those suggestions. Partly is understandable because they're experts, so they think that I know, so you shouldn't really tell me what I'm supposed to do. However, then you have to actually invest a lot of time and energy to build that trust between them and with them. So once you have the data, this would definitely actually facilitate the discussions. And that's how it was the case for me too. And lastly, it's actually gonna create a framework because the subject matter experts are not really familiar with the product of learning analytics. And so how they could interpret that as well, by having a data scientist or a data analyst, we can actually help facilitate that. Now, before I move on, if there are no questions, I can see that, really sometimes it's working effective without analytics. Oh, these are good questions. Okay, that's important for ROI too. Absolutely, I agree with you. How else do you really know is working effective? Okay, well, this is how I'm going to be talking about, and that's going to be a question that basically I'm posing to you. So we hold on to that, and then we'll get back to it. The goal of the project that I was involved in, it was basically included a number of science courses at a university. So one was that we wanted to find hidden information that basically was difficult to capture through traditional ways. Most of you and us, basically in trainings or educational settings, would just rely on a smile sheets, which are not really diagnostic enough. And they wouldn't really tell us much about the data that could help us maximize the learning experience of learners. So that's one goal of using the learning analytics. The other one was that we wanted to build a prediction algorithm so that we could identify learners with low prior knowledge or those who actually were in need of learning support. So after identifying them, we wanted to provide a scaffold because a lot of them were actually dropping out. I'll tell you more about that. And the last goal was to create a digital trace data so that we could track all those patterns and then throughout the other semesters as they move along. We found out that based on those data that they needed support in self-regulation skills. A lot of them were actually struggling with time management and submitting their assignment on time, or they were simply somehow not having any plans and they didn't really know what they were doing in the course, which is why that it led to their dropouts as well. They didn't know how to learn, so they were not really applying effective learning strategies. And of course, motivation. They needed to be motivated because they halfway through the semester, they would just decide to give up and then either drop out or just continue and then fail. So there was a high failure rate in these science courses as well. That's what we gathered from data, which we tried to provide those support for them, and I'll tell you how. The tools that we used, one was the LMS, because even though they were all face-to-face traditional lectures, all the materials the instructors would put them up on the LMS so that the students could also, refer to them during their own time, but then it was mainly used to submit assignments. Splunk was the software that we used in order to track the data. So why did we use Splunk rather than Tableau or Power BI, for instance? It was because Splunk allowed us to do all those processes within one place. And specifically, after a few months that we started, they actually came up with an app, MLTK, this machine learning toolkit. This app helped us actually build the algorithm, the prediction modeling, manage the data, report the data, and then most importantly, we were able to actually, connect the two with each other. So these two would talk to each other automatically because it was inserted as an LTI. So that's how it would pull all the data, the activity logs that we needed from the LMS and then back to the Splunk that the data analyst would work on. So my team consisted of a data analyst, myself as an instructional designer, and a number of instructors who were the subject matter experts. They were chairing those courses. So what did the data analyst do? So this goes back to the question that you were asking, how did we extract data? So this is what he did. First, he obtained the elements data, all those activity logs. So there's going to be a ton of information and data from the IT department. And it's not really easy to track. It's not easy to interpret as well. So what he did after that, he used SQL to build queries, which would help us extract the specific information that we wanted. If it was a behavioral patterns, they're basically the activities that they were doing at a certain time of day, for instance, all of those, their assignment submissions, how they were doing, what they were doing, all of that information through the queries, which were sent to the IT department, would basically help the department to extract and give us what we needed for those specific courses. From that, on a Splunk, they would build a data model. So the model would consist of a data set that would categorize all those behaviors and events that we wanted to track. It would be just like a table. That would be the outcome of that. And finally, within a Splunk, he could actually build a dashboard that would make the data more interpretable. If you see this, for instance, even I myself, like, can you make sense of it? Of course not. It's too much, and we wouldn't really be able to get much out of that. So we needed someone in order to interpret the data and put it in a visual manner that we could all follow. The outcome was something like this, or like this. So it might be a bit small because I'm just sharing screenshots with you, but then here you can actually see that it wasn't only tracking the students, it was also tracking the instructors as well. So that's something that we're going to be working on for our future project, because it's not just the students who are important, it's also the instructors. Their behavior also matters online. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. If you have any questions, please just let me know about the project that I just shared with you, or the goal of that, and how data was extracted.
You know, Elham, I wanted to just pop in real quick. I want to make sure, because I posted something in chat where I said that you didn't use XAPI to transfer any of the data. Is that accurate? I just want to make sure.
No, we did use XAPI.
Oh, you did?
That is actually required. Yes. Actually, most of the LMSs would have to have it. So basically, either SCORM or Tin Can or all of those, they have it built in.
Okay.
But yes, that's part of it that would help the LMS to actually extract the data.
Okay, so here another question. How much did you have to deal with XAPI yourself?
Me, none.
Okay.
None. As a learning designer, none.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
all work was just done by the data analyst.
Right. And that's sort of like, so like the data analyst and IT, right? Because it's, I think that's kind of one of the barriers where I see a ton of the friction is that, you know, when especially at learning and development events, once you start getting into that XAPI conversation, I know my eyes, I just start to kind of drift off because it's just too much for me. But just knowing that it's not something that you had to actually integrate yourself or do anything like that, I think that can be really, really helpful.
That's a very good point, Luis. You know, the fact is that learning analytics have always been around. Mm-hmm. And businesses, customer service, they have all been using it. It's just that these types of data were always kept for those purposes. And then when the elements came along, and then in learning design, basically, it wasn't really that much shared with the learning designers. Mm-hmm. So including myself, for instance, I just knew roughly, and I didn't really much dig into that because I thought it's of no value to me. I prefer to gather data through the traditional way, which was surveys, and then looking at their assessment scores. That was
yeah.
Now I really think that we need to build really good relationships with the data analysts. We do need them in order to actually have a project successful, because without them, it would be quite hard. Even though I myself, whenever I'm involved in a team, I try to learn all of those. Mm-hmm. I'm not suggesting that now all the IDs have to go and learn that, but I'm basically going through a training for Splunk, and then we wanted to learn Tableau, and other ones. That's just me, because I myself like it. I just want to know how all these things are done. But it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else should do that. Yeah.
Yes. And so what LMS was it that you were using, if you don't mind?
Canvas.
Canvas. Okay, excellent.
Yes.
All right, good. And, sort of backing up, when I was in Las Vegas at DevLearn, there was actually a Splunk conference going on at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up talking to a guy there. Sort of a coincidence that you bring up Splunk as a visualization tool. Is that just primarily what it is?
It is. That's what it is. Yes.
Okay. All right.
That the difference between Splunk and Tableau, for instance, is that the app, the MLTK, machine learning toolkit that they have, it just makes it easy to add it as an LTI to the LMS, so that it can just talk to the LMS and then extract the data from the LMS. That's that. Otherwise, you would need basically two people. The IT extracting data from the LMS itself, then passing it along to the data analyst analyzing it, and then coming up with a visualization of that within a Splunk. So rather than having it happening in two different separate places, Splunk allowed us to do it in just one place.
Right. Okay. And I want to just read a couple comments from chat just for the podcast version of this. But Eric B is talking about how his stumbling block right now is how to access a course published in XAPI. Coding makes him itchy, which I'm sure it does for a lot of people out there in our space. Yeah. Dominic sends variable data to Google Sheets for analysis, which I think sounds really fascinating. Mohammed says, lastly, check LMS doesn't support XAPI statements. I'm not sure what LMS that is, but and he's wondering if something has changed.
Yeah, of course they have different, correct. Yeah. And some of them would actually require you to build some of them yourself, add it.
Oh yeah, and I think Amy is kind of responding to that. She says some have started to adopt, but may not be able to report out all XAPI calls built into the content assets. So
that's right.
There you go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and drop off now.
Sure. Okay. So I'll just carry on about how it affected me. So now I have those data, and now I am supposed to start with the redesign of those science courses. In my conversation, first of all, I used two models. First was SAM. So you let me know, basically, if you think I'm going in too much detail about them, or you want me to just move on faster, please let me know. So what I did was that in the preparation phase that I told the SMEs that I'm going to be gathering data. And that was the gap analysis that I wanted to do to find out now, why is it that the students are dropping out, and why do we have a high failure rate? Then it was an iterative design phase through which basically we stepped into the design phase, and finally with the development one. So in phase one, what I did, I went and studied observed their lectures and the lab ones. Then I reviewed their textbook, which was like a holy book to them, so they were all relying on that strongly. I also reviewed their lecture materials, which were the PowerPoint slides that they were using in class and online, as well as their exams. So what did I find? Firstly, I found that they were really lecture heavy. So they were huge lecture halls with over 100 students. And I realized that around those 2 hours of lectures, the instructors are continuously just nonstop going through the PowerPoint slides and just pushing a lot of information. Once in a while, maybe some students in the front seats would ask some questions, otherwise none, with minimal learning activity. Active learning, sorry. So, and research, there's a large body of research telling us that just lecture by itself is inefficient for learning, and we do need active learning with practice that would actually help maximize their learning experience. Then another thing, based on my discussions with the subject matter experts, I learned that the students are not able to consolidate all those concepts. So they were lacking the learning of deep structure because information was actually given to them in chunks. So different concepts. The big picture was never given to them. Besides, they never even got to practice that whole big picture in order to connect all those ideas with each other. And most importantly was the misalignment of the exam and the instructional goals. So what students were basically lacking over here was they were not even being tested for those. They were not being taught or given a chance, an opportunity to practice. I came up with a report and I shared it with them. So the report basically said what we were lacking, and then the suggestions that we wanted to basically somehow implement. They were all as suggestions. So I made sure that they do realize that we could just move on gradually and in an incremental manner. That's why, because my experience has shown me, and it was the same case again in here too, even though we had these 4 instructors on board, the rest of them were resistant to a sudden change if we wanted to make modifications. So my advice to all the IDs is that if you're facing such basically situations in your own organization and you really passionately want to make a change, try to move on slowly. So you can say that, okay, we can have one phase of that. Yes, we do what you like, but can we add something else to that as well? That's why the improvement basically happened in 2 phases. Okay, so basically the poll, I had asked the questions whether or not you actually conduct gap analysis. So how many people have told us that? 7 people. Well, that's good. It's good to know that they're actually, you do conduct a gap analysis. That's great. Okay. But in reality, let's face it, a lot of organizations won't even allow us to actually conduct that for the reason of basically time constraint. So there's budgeting and also there is time constraints. So that might somehow limit us in order to carry out a comprehensive performance gap analysis. But it would be great if we could, and if we have data. So that's one of the ways of convincing the stakeholders to conduct it. So in phase 2 for design, I used Merrill's CDT. So for that, the component display theory, I wrote learning objectives that was mainly for the design, not to be shared with the learners, is based on the chapters. Then I wanted to identify what types of knowledge were actually addressed within the content. Then I aligned them with the exam questions to see whether or not they are there. And as you see, most of those, the higher levels in terms of procedural or process principle, were not really addressed in the content, merely the fact and concept. And this is what, again, the students were tested for, mainly recall of information. So I decided to use the Dicken-Carey model. And because, of course, I adapted it slightly too, is that I wanted my conversation with the SMEs to somehow guide us through the design aspect too. And they were involved in all the process. We were meeting on a weekly basis about that. So this is that basically in terms of the instructional goal, I asked them to think of what it is that they want to achieve. And then if there are those skills that they want they want the learners to achieve, and if they want to achieve those skills, what are the performance objectives that we want them to have? Based on that, it led us to the rest of the design stage. And so for the development, the 2 phases of that, the incremental changes that I mentioned to you, the first thing was that we're going to enhance the PowerPoint slides. So I took the PowerPoint slides and then I enhanced them based on principles of multimedia learning, as well as the cognitive load theory. So, and they were actually listed as evidence, suggests that but the mayor and his colleagues stated in 2013 that when they enhanced the lectures, students did better in terms of knowledge transfer. And so that was effective. And it was really the case after we gathered data. The second phase was more comprehensive, involving a larger team of developers as well, to basically create videos. So those videos, students had to illustrate certain things, for instance, an atom, for instance, or a cell, or certain procedures. First of all, I told the instructors that use a visualizer and then draw it in class as well, give them that much of practice, as well as providing videos that they could refer to, and then they could practice on their own. They were also asked to submit. Also, there were videos on concepts and experiments. Instead of spending so much time in class, just pushing information to them, most of that information was actually taken onto the LMS. So the course became a hybrid one. And then another one was adding learning tips that I use a character called Harry. So all those tips, I gathered them from, based on cognitive science, basically the strategies that could help them encode and process information more seamlessly. And for the drawings, we used the handwriting on Lightboard. And there was a study that showed that if a student see the hand movement of showing them something, they can learn better than those who can just see a full body and then a talking head. If any one of you is interested to basically get one of these resources, any of these resources, I'm basically happy to share them with you. All right, so what questions do you have for me so far?
I don't think I'm really seeing any questions pop up. I'm going to take a look in the Q&A section here. Oh, okay. Well, here's one larger sort of question from Katie. It looks like maybe you answered and she missed it, but you're referring to a project. What project was this exactly?
So this was a project that was state funded and involved a number of learning science courses. And so because of the high dropout and failure rate, we were asked to redesign the science courses at the university.
Excellent. Okay. And Amy just asked a question, was your objective work used by programmers and analytics?
What objectives is Amy referring to?
Let's see. Was your objective work used by programmers and analytics? Maybe, Amy, you'll have to elaborate on that one a little bit.
Yeah, I can. Was your objective work used by programmers and analytics? Yeah. Are you referring, Amy, to learning objectives that I wrote? Okay. Oh, no. Everything based on the instructional design. So I knew the gap. So it was more or less, it was based on the data analytics that we had. I knew that where the gap was. So based on that, I wrote the objectives. But then they had to be aligned to basically what we wanted to achieve in the end. Does it answer your question? But I didn't use programmers. It's basically the responsibility of a learning designer to do that. Oh, you're talking about, okay.
All right.
Okay, good. Okay, so you got it.
Okay.
All right. So what did I learn from this project? Well, mostly I mentioned it to you at the beginning. It was just a rediscovery of that also learning analytics are actually valuable to learning designers that we could use. And so these are the things that I learned. If we want to make sure that learning design works well, so we need to investigate the learning process and outcomes. And for that, we need basically evidences. We need to gather evidences. And we need to collect data that are diagnostic. I'm repeating this because it's very important what we want to measure. Another thing which was fascinating to me was actually the collaboration, because I have worked in different places in different countries. And I'm going to say that it never happened that basically it was such a seamless process working with the SMEs. There is always some sort of resistance in terms of change, and that's understandable psychologically. So having worked on this project actually made this whole process really seamless. And besides, every one of us, had a part to play. If we didn't have a data analyst, we couldn't have really interpreted all those data, which weren't really making any sense to us. If we didn't have the subject matter experts, so we couldn't have carrying on. So all of us, the inclusion of all of these team members helped us to actually have a very smooth project together. And we all were working towards a common goal. And what I also learned is that they are actually complementary to each other. So learning design and learning analytics are complementary. They do complement each other. Now, you might be asking, how can I collect data if my training isn't online? So I mentioned LMS, I mentioned Splunk, being connected to the LMS, extracting data. So all of that basically means the learning is happening online. What if you have a traditional training? What if it's all face-to-face? How would you collect data? I'd like to hear from you first. I think we had that in the question, no, the Q&A. Yeah, poll is being used, okay. Survey, very good. Again, it depends how we design the survey. So that's a very important thing, and that has its own discussion as well, which I'm going to be briefly talking about. That's right. So that's what we've been using traditionally, and AR experience, why not? Again, that's technology, why not? Of course, AR is, again, would actually give us a lot of data as well. Of course, I do agree. Okay, so the project, the study that I'm working on is completely traditional. The content is not online. And what I'm trying to find out is basically the goal is to see the linkage between training evaluation, learning design, and training transfer. For this study, I'm using Elham Learning Transfer Evaluation Model developed by Will Thalheimer. Sam mentioned it a couple of weeks ago about a variety of models, evaluation models that you could use. I would suggest that you use one that you think you can get diagnostic data. It can give you data that you could use and measure in order to basically enhance your design. So he also mentioned that if you want to just measure task competence, for instance, that's what you have to be using Elham. I wouldn't much agree on that, because it's not about basically for which one using different models. It's just a matter of what is easier and basically what benefits you and what you're looking for. So it's not just about that. I'm basically gathering data, measuring all of these, the learning perceptions, that the reactions, I'm going to tell you how, then decision-making, competence, and then following that, transfer 1 month after the training. That's my theoretical. Good, someone just shared Will's website. Correct, that's right, that's the one. So this is my theoretical argument. And this is basically result-driven design. So I believe if we know what we want to measure in the end, this is going to inform the design elements to us, which would result in the application and retention of knowledge and competences that in the end we are targeting for. This is just a theoretical argument. So for that, it would be an iterative cycle. And it means that you have the results in mind, and then you're targeting what you want to measure. Based on that, you design and then evaluate, and then you generate data. Now, the most important thing is that if this is just traditional, you're just gathering data through assessments and surveys. So it's important that you actually store the data in a centralized location. So that's what matters, and that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm working with a hospital for that, on nurse training. And so I'll be using all that data and the reports, putting it on an online platform that they could refer to in future. Because when I had discussions with the stakeholders and I asked them if they have any kind of data, do they know they're spending millions of dollars every year on medical training? Do they know whether they're working fine or not? They couldn't answer that question. So that means we do need some sort of data in order to figure out what we are doing is really working. Also, one of you mentioned about ROI. So you could do it in a traditional way. You could use surveys, Qualtrics, and other means of data collection. But the most important thing, even if you're using surveys, for instance, we don't want to use what is just asking them as a smile shows whether they like the training or not, or they like the instructors or not. It's beyond that. We want to make sure that they are actually perceiving the learning in the right, in the effective way, which we have intended for. And then along with that, we also measure other aspects of it in terms of knowledge, in terms of the skills that they wanted to achieve, to make sure whether our programs are really working for them or not. And I am strongly against seeing that it's not just me, of course. There are many other educators and L&D professionals who highlight this, that training is not a learning event. It's not an event. It's actually an ongoing process. So by doing this, it would help us actually create adaptive learning, because sometimes training might not be the solution. So we need to have all those answers rather than just relying on our habituated experiences that because we are asked to design training, we just go ahead with that. It's always good to have data, and that's what basically I'm hoping that you would contemplate on, and hopefully make changes gradually. Well, you have already answered this question, some of you. You've said that you're going to use AR, you're going to use surveys. Qualtrics is just online, it's easy, or SurveyMonkey. Any other ways that you could do that, but most importantly is make sure that your design is something that basically give you good data. And if there are any other means that you think that you can think of, if you're using traditional learning programs, they could share with us. Otherwise, I think I'm done. And you can reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn, or you can email me at elham@rubixlearn.com. And if you want me to share any of those resources with you, or if we want to continue the conversation. I love conversations. That's how it helps us, grow. And then by sharing the ideas, that's how our L&D community is just growing bigger and bigger.
Well, that's, I think, the whole point of TLDC is, I think, just to be able to use one another as resources and just get these conversations out there. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing. I do have one question here that hopefully you have just a little bit of time to answer this one. But
of course,
you had first started out doing all of this. Is there anything when you look back that you wish you had known before you had started? Like if there is anything in particular? Like, what do you wish?
I love the question. That's a great question. Mm-hmm. Well, I wish I had basically Well, one thing, of course, I did mention about how learning analytics could be used. That's something that I didn't know initially, because those experts could never give me a convincing answer. And data analysts to work with the IDs, it wasn't really that much common. Now there's more need for them, and then we see the value of them. But I'm not suggesting that every company must hire a data analyst, because it could be very expensive too. So partly is basically for me to know how these data could actually be used. That's something that I wish I had known.
Right.
Yeah.
So were there any specifics on in educating yourself about how to utilize data that you can share with people? Just because it's obvious that you're a completely competent instructional designer and you have a really good working knowledge of data as well. So, that is a pretty powerful combination, I think, especially in, for anybody in today's like sort of job market, just being able to do both. But were there anything that just often you can think of that just helped you on that?
I am learning all about data. First of all, I started off with statistics. So how to do the analysis myself? For instance, if I wanted to, I had the surveys. I realized that I have to teach myself to know how to, in a very, not somehow, which is scientific way, not just reading some comments and then think that, okay, so that means that everything is good. So I would highly recommend everyone to be familiar with at least basic information of the statistics. Regression models, for instance, that's very important too. So it can help us somehow predict the changes we want to make. Will that work or not? And then we can just track that. It wouldn't be really hard. You can easily access all of those on YouTube, and you can get used books from Amazon or any other, bookstores. So, or your library. So that's pretty easy. And other than statistics, then it's about basically learning analytics, data analytics specifically. I would say that I would love to learn all this software and then see how it is done. So the data analyst I'm working with, he is fascinating, wonderful colleague. So we've been working very closely together. He immediately, as soon as I told him that I'm really interested, show me how this is done. He did actually show me, how a Splunk and LMS, all those, are working. And that's how I got more motivated to actually do it on my own. So I'm actually going through online training. Splunk has a number of, the fundamentals are free training that you could actually go through. Tableau has a free training as well. Then other than that, there is just, small amount of money that you have to spend if you're more interested to continue.
Right. No, that's fascinating. And I'm sure that just this journey altogether has been extremely valuable for your career.
Absolutely. I highly believe that, Luis, that our career is just expanding so much. And we need to get out of our comfort zone. And if we really want to be successful in what we are doing, by success, I mean doing what we are really supposed to do for learners.
Right.
Because technology is constantly changing. The world is changing. Organizations are changing. So all these dynamics that are basically coming into place, we need to move very fast with them, rather than relying on all those experiences that we had, olden time learning theories. That is not sufficient.
Right.
I believe that, yes, we have to update ourselves constantly.
Yeah. And it's something I hear just on a regular basis. The architecture of the organization is changing, where data is becoming the centerpiece. And it's one of the reasons why, I thought that this was a really important subject to cover with the training, learning, and development community. And as much as I think that this is going to be the last, episode in this playlist, I don't think it is. I think that we're definitely going to be adding. In fact, data, I think it was Data Society, Ellen, who was actually in the chat. I was talking to her this morning about adding on to this series, because this is an ongoing conversation, much like how Megan Torrance does her cohort and, and other groups like that. It's really important to kind of keep this as a consistent part of sort of your professional development. So we'll continue to do this. And Elham, thank you so much again
You're
for
most welcome.
coming on.
Great. And all the other participants, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming in this morning. And we'll see you next time. Just keep an eye out on the website and on social media when we'll be adding to this next month, or actually this month. It's November. Sorry, I got put off by a week because of the fires. I was evacuated last week, but we're doing extended reality for November. So AR, VR, mixed reality. All this month, I have some excellent guests coming up. I have like more guests than I know what to do with, but we're going to do that all this November, and we'll see everybody next time. Thanks for coming in.
You're most welcome, and thanks for having me, Luis. Yeah.